5. So, did it really make that much of a difference yesterday in that particular case? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on, I guess, how worried you are about your grade, right? So, in that particular case, maybe not a huge deal, right? So today, the last thing that they talk about is working backwards. Okay? Have you ever thought about working backwards in math? Well, yeah, working backwards. Working backwards in math would be like if you actually knew the answer before you started, and then using the answer and kind of going backwards. Okay? So you might do a lot of this when you get into like pre-calc and calculus and those kind of things, because it'll be very, very beneficial to do those kind of things. Where would you do this? You would do this if you thought about your grade at the end of the quarter or the end of the semester, and you either thought about what you wanted for your final grade, or for some of you, maybe if you were worried if you were going to pass a class to be eligible, you might start doing some of these kind of things to actually figure out either how good or bad you had to do on that final test and still get to the goal that you set. This is a good question.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
So like going backwards, like doing math problems backwards is basically like doing algebraic expressions, but like you know the answer, but you're just
Kinda. Yeah. That was a pretty good one. So basically, this is what we're talking about. Brad's average for 5 quizzes is 86. Make sense? Okay. So if you thought about that statement right there, how would we have gotten that? How would Brad have found that he had an 86 for an average for his 5 quizzes?
He added up all of his numbers that he got for his quiz and divided them by 5.
Yeah, correct. So the sum of 5, or the first 5, we should say, because the sum of 5 maybe doesn't make sense. First 5 divided by what? 5, right? Because we had 5 quizzes, equaled, and then what would it have equaled? 86. Everybody understand that? Okay. So then it goes on and says he wants to have an average of 88 for 6 quizzes. What is the lowest score that he can get? So, what do you think? What's the process that we'd have to go through if now, instead of having 86 as my answer, I wanted 88 as my answer? So the first things first, before we even talk about the process or what, would you think, just in general now, that what are some of the conclusions that you could make just throwing things out real quick by looking at those 2 things right there? What would have to be true about that 6th quiz? I'd have to do pretty good on it, right? I'd definitely have to do better than probably both of those numbers. And unfortunately, when you start doing some of these things and you have a lot of whatever we're talking about, quizzes, games played maybe, those kind of things, when you get more and more, this number would have to get really far one way or the other to make a drastic change. Does that make sense? So if we got a 0, we would definitely make it an extreme change, wouldn't we? But even if we got more than 88, it might not really fluctuate my score, my overall score that much. Does that make sense? So those are a couple of things that you need to think about before you start the process of actually trying to figure it out. What could my answer be, or what should my answer be? If I end up with an answer of 87, does that make sense? Probably not, right? Because there's no way that if it's only at 86 right now and I got an 87 for my last test, that it would jump up to an 88, would it? It's going to have to be somewhere in the 90s and maybe quite a bit high in the 90s. Okay, so all I'm trying to have you do here is stop for a second and think about what should my answer probably look like before I actually try to tackle the process. So what are we going to do? What do you think? So basically, we would have to do what here? We'd have to say that we're going to have 6 on the bottom, right? Because now we're going to have 6 quizzes. And on the top should be what? This should be the sum of all 6, right? So, how do we find that? Is it okay if I just take this right here and say that the sum of all 6 is some variable x, and I took x divided by 6 is equal to 88? Would that work? It would? Addie says it would work. So if this is going to work, what would I do to solve that problem right there? I'd multiply, right? Because this shows division. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 6. My 6's over here cancel out. I'm left with my x, which is good. So what's 88 times 6? 8, 4,
528.
528.
I have 88 times 5 already.
Okay, good. So now, think about Addie's answer. Is that what we want? Does x equal the sum of all 6? And does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because what does it ask us to find?
Lowest score.
So in a sense, this is what the total of the 6 would be, right? But does this really help us? Why?
Because that's not saying what the lowest score is of the 6 quizzes that they took.
Okay. So what do I need?
We need to find what they got, like the scores for the quizzes. Like how did you get like 528?
Okay. How did I get to 528? Is there some way that I would know what the total of some of the quizzes are? In this particular case?
Oh, wait.
Well, if I go back to this problem right here, could I figure out what the sum of all 5 of the first 5 quizzes are? Because I could do what? Basically what we did in the bottom one right here, right? So if I did 5 times 86, I thought you had this done.
Oh, I have 88 done.
430.
430. This means that this is the sum of the first 5. Everybody agree with that? Okay. So this down here would have been including the 6th one. So what do I do with those two things? What do I do with this number right here and this number down here? Subtract it. If I take 528 minus 430, what do I get?
What number?
98.
Thanks. 98. And what's 98 mean?
That's the lowest.
Oh.
That's the lowest score that I possibly could get if I wanted to move it from an 86 to an 88. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So is that kind of a weird, complicated process?
Yeah.
Let's try to simplify that process, right? So what's another way that I could do it? Well, another way that I could do it to basically set up those two things into one group. So I'm going to try to take all that information and turn it into one problem instead of doing both of those problems. Because that was kind of confusing, right? So does everybody understand that this is the sum of all 5 and how I got that? Okay? So I'm going to take the sum of the 5. And if I would do this problem right here, what would I have to do to 430 in this problem if I wanted to include the 6th one? What would I have to do to 430 with my score of the 6th quiz?
Divided by 6?
Before that. What? Remember, this is how many quizzes right here?
5.
This is 5. And we want 6, so what do I have to do to 430 over here in the problem to get to my 6th one. What would I have to do with 430? Because that's the total of the first 5. What would I have to do to now take the average of the 6th one, or all 6 of them? I'm going to add it to some variable. And this variable right here is my 6th quiz. And what do I want the average to be? 88. So basically, this whole problem ends up being this equation right over here. Because, look, this is the total of my first 5, and then I'm going to add the 6th, so I would have 6 groups of quizzes. I divide that by 6, and I get my answer that I want. So now, let's see if it works out, and we get 98 again. How would I try to get this to be, to get x all by itself again? In this problem right here, how would I get rid of my division? We're going to multiply again by 6. So my 6's cancel each other out. I get 430 plus x is equal to, we already did this, right? 528. Now how do I get my x all by itself? Whatever I subtract on one side, I subtract on the other side. So it ends up being the exact same thing that we did over there. It's just, this might be a little bit more mathematically, it makes sense than trying to do all that stuff. But do you understand where I got this equation? So I got to first find out what's the total of all of them that I know. And I can do that. And then I'm going to add it to the last one that I'm looking at. But now, instead of having 5, we had 6, and then our total. So, again, look at, we were at 86 and we wanted to bump it up 2 spots is all. But look how high we had to do or get on our last one. So look how much differential it takes to bump it up just 2 spots. It's kind of like, but if you go in the other direction, to take this from 86 to 84, we would hope that we would have to go in that big of a down. You know what I'm saying? Or a loss. So then basically, we could do that if we wanted to, right? So we could say, well, what if I wanted, our grading scale says, I wanted a C minus, a 77. Okay? So basically, mom and dad are okay with me getting a C. I don't know if they are, but. So if we would do that, then we could change this number right here to a 77 and do the exact same process and figure out what we could get on our last quiz and still get a C in the class. Right? So in some cases, some of the kids in like calculus would figure this out to see if they even have to take the semester test, for instance. Because the semester test here only counts as 10% of your grade. So you could set up a mathematical equation figuring out what you had for the first semester, what you had in the second semester, and then figure out. So in some cases, they might only have to do one problem in the whole test, and as long as they knew that they got that one problem correct, they would at least get an A or a B or pass or whatever. Right? Now, is that a great way of thinking about it? Depends on how you're thinking, right? If you're good with just passing, yeah. If you're like Grace, she's probably freaking out about an A minus, right? So she wants to know what the last thing is before it turns into an A minus. Colbeck's just happy to get a grade. Right? No?
What? Well, like, store problems ever ask for, like, the highest you could get?
No, because it doesn't matter. Well, yeah, so the highest I can get is always going to be 100. Right? So you could say, what would it be, what would my average be if I got 100 on the last one? So then I would just come up here, and I would take my 430 plus 100 divided by 6, and it would tell me what my new grade would be. But I can't really realistically get anything better than 100 unless somebody gave extra credit. Right?
I've right now in spelling, I have like 110% in spelling right now.
I have like
505 rating.
I can't imagine you being a good speller.
He's not, he just bribes her.
I do not.
What's the hardest word you know how to spell?
Don't even say it.
Don't pull out Mary Poppins.
He doesn't know how to spell I.
You think about that for a little bit.
Thesaurus.
So, questions here. Do you want to look at another one of these kind?
Yes.
Okay. I think we got to open the book because I don't think I have another one. So open your book to this section, which is 240. Yep.
250. 230.
So, you don't have this one, I guess, sorry. It was a waste of time for you to open your book, because I don't think you have this. Jenny's bowling average, anybody a bowler in here?
Me and Alex
Oh,
both
my
won.
160.
Yeah, we bowl for fun, not for like actually. No, you didn't.
I got a strike, but it was going like 10 miles
Nathan,
an
I
hour.
still want to ask you.
I got like a
I.
100 now.
Spell I. Spell I.
I.
Wrong. The other one.
Oh!
He does.
E-Y-E.
That's why you asked for a sentence.
I could have seen you saying it E-Y-I.
Either way.
All right, here we go. This is, I don't know who the person was, I forgot already. So, this is, I think it was a lady. Her bowling average.
I think it was.
Yeah, Jenny.
It was Jenny.
Okay, whatever. So, Jenny has a bowling average of 146, and this is what she has bowled in the last 3 times. Okay? So, the question is, what would she have to bowl in the 4th time to maintain 146 as her average? Okay?
So like she doesn't want higher or lower.
Well, she can always go higher, but she wants to maintain this. So your answer would be she wants at least that amount. Okay? So, what are we going to do? All right, add these together. 1, 2, 3, obviously. 40 is 80. 80 plus 30 is
110.
110. So we're up to 410, 418, 423. Okay. What does 423 mean?
The number when you add the first.
Okay, so what do we want to do to 423?
Got it.
But do we care about the 3 right now? No, we want this 4th score, right? So what do we want to do to 423?
Add the.
Variable.
You need to
The
find
next
Add the
score.
variable, right? Because this variable is that right there, right? Is my 4th bold. And so we're going to divide by what?
4.
4, right? Because we have a 4th score. And what do we want our answer to be?
146.
146. Go, see what you get. What can we, or what does Jenny need to get to continue to have 146 for her average? Again, now, as you're kind of looking at this or doing the math, should it be, I guess, what would be a guess if you haven't finished the math yet? Should it be bigger or smaller than these numbers?
Bigger.
Should it be quite a bit bigger? Remember, look at over here. We only wanted to move it up 2 spots, right? And we had to get a 98. So look at this one. I don't even have 146 yet.
So you might want like 100, somewhere in the 50s?
Yeah, so it's probably going to have to be quite a bit higher than my 145 that's I've done before.
Oh,
Every time.
oops.
I screw it up. In every single video that I watch.
Hey,
on
concentrate.
Oops.
I did this wrong. Why did I move the So does that make sense? That this person, Jenny or whoever it was, would have to have that big of a score? So, I'm taking
No. How would you even get that? Is that even possible?
161.
This is 300, Nathan.
Oh, it is?
Yeah,
You
that's
know
if
the
you get
perfect
strikes
name.
every single time.
I did not know that. I thought it was like 160 or something.
Now, the highest score is 160, but she was going to get a 161. How's that going to happen?
It's very possible.
No, it's not.
You have to
So, we're going to multiply both sides by 4. We got 584. And then we bring down the rest of our problem. And then we subtracted both sides to get our x. Okay? So, is it really working backwards? Yeah, kind of, because we already know what our answer is, right? We knew what our answer was, and we used that to our advantage to get back to what we wanted. Okay? Question?